Hello, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. And today with me are two distinguished guests from Israel, Asaf Heller and Omer Dang, both analysts dealing with air and space domain, air and space battlefield, both in operational and strategic dimensions, working at Tel Aviv University, having a strategic center there that deals with those issues, both of them with profound operational experience at the Israeli Air Force, doing both operational planning and execution. And I hope I haven't missed any part of what I should say. Please feel to add anything. Anyway, the audience can see experienced guys who know what the air power really is, not on paper, but in reality and in execution. So welcome, gentlemen. Let's get started.
Great. Hello, Jacek.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, we when Strategy and Future visited Israel, we met and talked about the peculiarity of the Israeli perspective. I know that you have a presentation that we might highlight now to our audience, where you would like to touch about the trajectory, the trends that will impact the air power projection. So feel free to start discussing it with this, especially emphasis on why Israeli Air Force is sort of different from what we think of, for example, U.S. Air Force. It's critically important for the Polish audience. Poland is at the right now is launching a major military reform program. We're thinking what sort of military strategy to adopt: offensive, defensive, active defense with some raids, with some, for example, preemption. It's all on the table. We are within NATO, and we completely have no capabilities at the moment, but we want to have some, given what's going on in the East. So especially if you could, when talking, if you just could have this sort of the perspective, it might be highly important and interesting for the especially Polish audience. Okay, so let's maybe show the presentation, Asaf.
I think that just before we start, because it is focused on air defense and future defense and what it means to air power, I think that you began with a comparison between the Israeli Air Force and the US Air Force, and they're much different, because the strategic requirement from the US Air Force and from the Israeli Air Force is, I would say, totally different. Because as superpower, the US should be able to operate everywhere and be prepared to every kind of conflict throughout the world. Its Air Force should be very flexible and capable of all kinds of conflicts everywhere. In the Arctic, in the desert, should be able to confront a superpower like China, maybe Russia, and low intensity conflict in Africa and in the Middle East. The Israeli Air Force was built to help to assist Israel operate in a very distinct area. We have our enemies and only our enemies. Israel is not intended to operate in 1,000 miles from home. It knows its environment, it knows its adversaries' capabilities, its adversaries' order of battle, capabilities, plans. And therefore, the Israeli Air Force was built to cope with these issues. And therefore, it doesn't have to have all the properties of the US Air Force. I think that maybe when you talk about Polish air power, it should be like Israeli Air Force, being prepared to a specific environment. You know your adversaries, you know their concepts, you know the order of battle, their capabilities. You can build an Air Force that is aimed to give answers only to these adversaries. I think it's totally different than the American point of view as a superpower. Israel is not a superpower. Poland is not a superpower as well.
I understand. What I gather from what you are talking about is that, if you are a medium-sized country with, capabilities that do not match the US, great power capabilities, you need to calibrate your capabilities. You need to smartly invest in a manner you want to project power, in a manner you want to use the Air Force. You really need to know what it should be all about and what missions it should carry out. And we shouldn't simply imitate the way the Americans are fighting the air, in the air, right? This is exactly the message, right?
America doesn't build the Air Force for specific problems.
Mm-hmm.
And Poland, as Israel, it doesn't matter that it's medium-sized or big-sized countries, do not structure their strategic environment. And the army is supposed to give answers for specific questions, and you need to structure your questions that you have to be answered. So the difficulty is to say what you are dealing with, and not what you are pretending to project. And if you will deal with your problems very good, you will project power, and you can be safe, as you can say. And America used the American Air Force for atomic warfare, first of all, and it has to be clear American warfare, because the Navy and the Army have their own Air Force. So when they are making a war in Afghanistan, the Air Force of the Navy will cooperate in the Navy warfare. So it's not the same Air Force that you are building.
Omer, this I understand. I think audience understands. But what about practical consequences? For example, if you speak about the Israeli Air Force, what are the practical implications and differences in how you execute operations, how you structure your structure, how you buy equipment also? Tell us a few examples, because you need to understand that we haven't had this discussion in Poland yet. So we are learning this curve, and you already have had it, many decades ago, probably. So please, if you just could be more specific in what are practical implications.
I'll give you a clear example, which will be good for a staff presentation, because it will speak for the same thing. Let's talk about air superiority. The Israeli Air Force know that it have to control the air in the warfare he involves in. We have to be above the enemy land to be able to destroy launchers of rockets and army in the front. This is the Air Force mission. So we have to destroy all the air defense systems of the enemy that will be able to fly free above the front. American Air Force doesn't have to stay above the front. They are making SID. They are making
suppression, yeah.
Suppression during the sorties, but they are not killing the enemy to be able to stay above 24/7.
So it's really amazing. People might not know it in Poland. So Americans are simply executing raids against some systems, particular missions, projecting power from far away, but they are not structured to loiter all the time above the battlefield, right? And so it's only about suppression of the systems and not about eliminating them, which is a different mission. Yes, this is what I understood from, and what it means in terms of the so it seems that the Israeli Air Force must be heavier the duties are heavier, or not, isn't it like that?
It is more complicated. We have to find an air defense system and kill them very fast. 24, 48 hours, we have to clear all the air defense system around us that will be able to fly free. The Americans doesn't look that way. They have time. They are superpower. They have a lot of resources. We don't have all of these resources, so we are using the short way, that is the long one, that is short one. We destroy all the air defense system. So we have to locate them very fast, and we have to be able to close the circles between the intelligence and the strikers. All of this have to be very fast and very accurate, because air defense system, and you have to know what you did, you've done.
So, Omer, are you implying that the Israeli Air Force is more lethal than the American Air Force in that respect, more agile in responding, and it had shorter ODA loop times, operational tempo cycles than the American Air Force, which is like a big cow flying low and heavy? Tell me what it means, again, in practical terms.
I think you are very accurate about it. And this is because we are small and not so big like the United States. We don't have we can't allow ourselves to do such a big and very expensive war concept.
I think that it is worth mentioning that during the beginning of the 70s, the Israeli Air Force tried to implement US methods to confront air defense, such as anti-radiation missiles. A lot of it. It was a very basic concept in the US Air Force, such as specific electronic warfare tactics. And all these tools failed Israel. And it wasn't able, the Israeli Air Force wasn't able to cope with the
You mean during Yom Kippur?
Soviet air defense.
During the attrition war.
Attrition war already.
Yeah, and after the 1973 war, the Israeli Air Force developed its own concept how to confront air defense. I think it was unique at the time. It was also secret for many years. It's not about only about missiles. It's about a combination of precise munition, mainly TV guided bombs, real-time reconnaissance. For example, UAVs were developed for this issue.
Your own indigenous Israeli, your own situational awareness system.
To locate air defense batteries and very highly developed command control component that used maybe the first computers in Israel. It was developed with the Weizmann Institute, for example. And the combination of real-time reconnaissance and standoff TV gliding bombs and command control intel cells made Israeli Air Force being able to destroy very quickly a very sophisticated air defense array in Syria, in Lebanon, during the 1982 conflict. And actually, within less than a day, most of the air defense over there was destroyed.
So Asaf, if I may summarize, first of all, you decided at the time to create your own intelligence gathering systems, right? Then, meaning then you created your own command and control system, creating a loop from intelligence gathering, then orientation, then decision and action, right? ODA loop, your own indigenous situational awareness and decision-making process. without any participation of the Americans, right? Although you were flying the American jets, yeah?
Yes.
Including the American bombs.
And the American bombs.
Some of the American bombs. We had special bombs, but some of them was American bombs.
Yes, so for that purpose, probably you had to manipulate the electronic systems and, you know, sort of the software of those, you know, of those systems, both the aviation, you know, airplanes and the command links and control and, you know, radio electronic systems, so that the Americans could not override what you were doing, right? So you really knew what you wanted to achieve in that respect, yeah?
I think that it's very accurate. The airframes were American airframes. Most of the bombs were American bombs. At least at the beginning, a lot of the electronic warfare equipment came from the US. But Israel used its own resources to develop. At least at the beginning, they were like spices, not the missiles, but you add to the food, such as very small UAVs. They were not expensive like the F-4 Phantom, but they were very important, such as specific developed Intel operational cells. It's very important, but it doesn't require the investments such as developing an aircraft. I think it might be very interesting for Poland as well to develop its own CONOPS in confronting the specific operation problem that it has by using American assets, but the thinking should be local. And
yeah,
some of the components.
You know, strategy and future that I represent is trying to promote this thing, this, you know, this idea, this concept that we need to think twice whether we want to be, as a whole military, not only air power in Poland, we want to be in an auxiliary force of the American power projection, just like Australians are, for example, or Canadians, right? Or we would like to be more like Israeli Air Force, being a separate, completely separate, independent air power, even using the same airframes, but, you know, I mean, in terms of the method of use and all that it involves in terms of logistics, of operational planning, should be our indigenous. And sometimes it's so difficult to explain to people that we need to have our own indigenous, you know, way of doing it, because we might be alone in war anyway. So I understand that this is quite obvious in Israel. You don't need to convince anybody about the need to think about that along those lines, right, Asaf? No, Omer?
Well, the last time in which foreign air force took part in a war in Israel was in 1956, when Ben-Gurion demanded that French aircraft and French pilots will stay here to protect Israel, because the Air Force was, Israel Air Force was very new. But since then, no foreign Air Force flew here in war, don't mean in exercises. It's different when you try to build up an Air Force that should be part of NATO, for example.
Yeah.
You need to be able to cooperate very tightly with the other air forces. It's not something that the Israeli Air Force has to do. It's, of course, cooperation is nice and sometimes it's important, but not in the same manner that the Polish Air Force might need to cooperate or fly with other NATO air forces.
So I think Jacek, I think Poland is like Israel because it has a direct threat, not like France or Germany. Even though you are within NATO, it's like Lithuania, Latvia, and some other countries in your north and eastern part of Europe. You have a direct threat that you have to deal with, and you have to be prepared to protect yourself at least for a few days or part of time on your own. And this is why you have to be precise in your building of your army. It not just have to be part of NATO. It have to be unique for Poland problems. I'm not a Poland specialist, but we'll talk in the next few minutes about Poland problems. But Poland have to decide what is her problems and to deal with them. This is the Israeli part of this conversation. This is what we can add to Poland.
And I understand, but I'm sure that you know, after we talked in Tel Aviv, you were thinking what sort of problems Poland might face. So maybe you have some thoughts how we should shape our air power in this new era where, you know, war might be, you know, there, and this is Russia, which is quite a power. So what do you think? What is your gut feeling? What sort of air power we should procure?
Before we'll talk about what air power you should be building, or what I think you should be building.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Poland, the strategic and operational problem that, or at least we'll decide for this conversation, what is it? So we'll have a similar base for what we are talking about. Otherwise, I'll just say what I think, and you can't be able to. So I think, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, or if you think that I should talking about something else. I think Poland have two strategic problems with the operational combat. First, you have to be able to defend yourself from just I'll think about the word, for a depth
Strikes.
Depth strike with, just like was on Kiev.
Mm-hmm.
A very deep penetration to Warsaw. So this penetration have to be on the ground. It have to include tanks. Mm-hmm. And all the logistic about it, and you have to be able to stop this from be able to get to Warsaw. Okay, this is first problem Poland have to be able to take. The second problem, which I don't know how Air Force is able to be very efficient, is if Russia will want to take eastern small parts of Poland and destroy them like they're doing in Donbass and then in Luhansk. So this is another problem. And the third problem is that you have to be able to keep your industrial environment free and safe, and not like Ukraine, which is most of the industrial parts of her in the east and the south. Poland, I think industrial parts are not in the east of Poland. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the combine of these three problems is what I think, after we talked in Israel, the Poland problem. Mm-hmm. And it's defensive problem. So Poland doesn't have any intention to be able to do a first strike on a big monster like Russia. I don't think it's realistic. It's defensive problem. And so if we are okay with this, we can start our conversation. So
it is very interesting, Omer. Very interesting. Asaf,
Omer talked about the strategic level. I would like to add my emphasis on the operational level regarding potential conflict between Poland and Russia. First, when you build an air force, need to take into consideration that during the last decades, the capabilities of air defense became much more effective than in the past. And I think the balance between the capabilities of Air Force and air defense is shifting towards the air defense capabilities. For many years, the West.
So air defense is stronger than air power.
US and its allies based most of the military power on air power. It doesn't really matter whether it's Air Force or the Air Force of the Navy or the Air Force of the Army. Air Forces aircraft are flying to distant areas and drop precise bombs are very important in the military thinking in the West. And for many years, for various reasons, the Air Force had its upper hand. I think that nowadays we see the coming back of much more effective air defense that can better detect also low observables such as the F-35 and F-22, can intercept aircraft, UAVs, and missiles much better than it used to do 20 or 30 years ago, able to use electronic warfare to disrupt communication, disrupt navigation, everything that is needed for an aircraft to reach where its target and hit it precisely. And I think that when you build an air force, you should be prepared that the step now that you need to overcome in order to cope with adversary air defense is much higher than it was 20 years ago.
It's Asaf, if I may, it's amazing that this is what the Israeli pilots and Israeli experts are saying. I mean you, because Israel is all about air power and projecting air power to the, in this vicinity, yes, in its own geopolitical vicinity. So if you say so, you really need to feel, not at ease with this development, right? Because it diminishes your options, for example, to preemptively knock out elements that threaten Israel, right?
We believe
it doesn't just a second moment. I don't think that there are no answers, and Israel is developing these answers when it faces the new modern air defense. But our starting point in the Israeli Air Force is very high. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is be a little bit higher in order to overcome.
I understand.
That includes S-300, S-400, S-17, S-22, etc. I think that when you start from brand new, you can take other routes. And you should also take into consideration that our adversaries is not Russia. Russia is much stronger than potential adversaries of Israel. Yeah. We don't facing superpower, even though there are Russian troops and Russian aircraft on the other side nowadays.
So what I read from what you're saying is that we need to be careful when trying to procure a robust air power, because it will be very difficult to overwhelm the anti-air, air defense systems of a power like Russia, because this is the trend of the battlefield, and so we need to be smarter on that. And second, we need to think whether we want simply to use the air power in a defensive mode, trying to secure our own airspace, which is easier, rather than projecting power out into the foreign territory by trying to knock out the systems, the artillery and stuff. This is what am I reading it properly, Asaf?
I think that when you talk about defense, you should also talk about offensive defense.
Uh-huh.
For example, look at the CONOPS in Israel. In order to be able to operate Air Force in a contested area, you should destroy the other side's air defense systems. It takes time. You need technology, you need intelligence, you need a lot of components in order to make your Air Force capable of confronting the other side. In order to strike the tanks, you need to destroy the air defense if you want to use aircraft. But maybe if you build totally different air power, such as much smaller UAVs, for example, you can use them in a contested area without thinking that you might lose all of them. And I'm not talking about the Bayraktar in Ukraine, but much more like the quadcopter, for example.
Now, smaller and expandable and cheap, yes, and mass.
They cannot carry a 1-ton bomb to long distances, but maybe if what you need is, for example, reconnaissance over the battlefield or striking tanks, small munitions, maybe it's more relevant for an Air Force that you're talking about.
So what you are implying again is suggesting is that the evolution shows that it's the UAVs, the drones, that will be the kings of the battlefield, at least in the contested area, because you can they are cheap, expendable, you don't care, and at least they are doing the job because there are so many of them, and they create a kill chain, right?
In the front line.
In the front line.
But it depends on the concept, on the way you think Poland should conduct a war. For example, if you think that interdiction is important in order to prevent divisions of tanks coming into Poland, then you need to operate maybe 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers into the other side to destroy their logistics.
Yes. And then what it means?
And then there are several different types of answers. You can use aircrafts, but you should know that you need to gain air superiority, sufficient air superiority in advance. Or you can build a much larger UAV fleet in order to get there. But you need to protect the communication, for example. If they are jammed, they won't operate. Or you can build a long-range munition, like, for example, what the Ukrainians are using now, the HIMARS American system.
Yeah.
This is something that you can use instead of Air Force.
And what would you do if you were Poland? So then let's speculate a bit.
I just want to be a little bit, just to exact Asaf words. First, I think Poland is close to Israel because Russian fronts won't be with a lot of air defense systems like around Moscow. Okay, so it's amount of systems that can be destroyed. It's not a air contest that you won't be able to operate in, but in the hinterland it will be a very big problem. So you won't be able to attack the hinterland. It will be defended by a lot of air defense system and Russian. It will be very complicated to deal with. So when we are talking about the front, you have to be able to destroy a lot of vehicles and to survive some of their defense systems of the Russians that will be launched to the front, which we saw in Ukraine. And the Ukrainians was able to destroy a lot of air defense, Russian air defense systems in the front because they don't have air view around them, air image around them, and they can't be defending all small UAVs around them in the front. So if you are enabled to destroy a lot of vehicles, doesn't matter what vehicles, you don't have to decide which one. Only a lot of vehicles there is no front that can move that won't be stopped.
Yeah, logistics. It's the
Yes,
most.
Israel in the 90s of the last century thought that if we will kill hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles in the front, Syrians won't be able to invade the Golan Heights.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. We were supposed to do, let's say, it doesn't matter the accurate number, 1,000 vehicles a day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can manage a lot of this amount of vehicles, there is no front that can move on and be able to be a real threat after 150 kilometers, 1,515 kilometers. It won't go. So this is how you can deal with the front. How to do it? I don't think HIMARS is the answer for that, because you need accurate intelligence. So HIMARS can attack concentrated places of logistics, but not moving targets.
Okay, and moving targets are better dealt with by the air power that has access to live intelligence, right? In the loop.
Right. And you don't need a very complicated intelligence like for air defense systems. You just need to kill vehicles. If you remember the armored front to Kiev, it was 60 kilometers vehicles on a road. If you have a small UAV with a lot of ammunitions, you can kill all this column in a day, and it's dead and no one can move on.
Yeah. So remember this long columns close to Kiev. We were talking in Israel that the Israeli Air Force would have obliterated those columns. You know, but I understand that obliteration could happen from the air power, from the UAVs, a dense network of UAVs, right, operating at range, and also from their precise artillery being in place. Yeah, isn't it so? Or?
I don't think that it's very complicated for artillery to be able to deal with such a column.
Mm-hmm.
It depends how you put it, but it's not very easy. It's a very long column, 60 kilometers, 100 kilometers.
So air power with standoff capability, so that it's not threatened by manpads, right? So this is a better option, right?
I'm not sure. If you have UAVs, very cheap UAVs, not too much cheap, but cheap UAVs that can operate in this battlefield, so it will contest manpads, because manpads are not very
effective
efficient against UAVs.
Omer, it is very interesting that this is you who are saying it. I mean, you're like Israeli guys having a robust air aviation, but I understand that you also are moving towards the UAV-dominated battlefield. Yeah, so you think that it's the UAVs that will carry through the main objectives in the future? What do you think about the air power in Israel itself?
This is the difference between Israel and Poland. Mm-hmm. Israel knows, we know, that we must attack a lot of targets in the enemy territory. Mm-hmm. And very high part of these targets is buildings and not just small vehicles. Mm-hmm. Poland doesn't threatened by 150,000 rockets of
Hezbollah.
It is not what Russia projects on air. So we will have to be much more careful to say that the Israeli problem is exactly like Poland problem.
I understand. So you sort of
we will have to have a very large air power of heavy bombs, which only can be carried with airplanes.
Yeah,
F-16, F-15s,
I
F-35.
understand. So you suggest that Poland might not have this sort of the same situation as we need to defend simply, right? In a way.
Yes. If Poland need the air defense, air power of airplanes like F-15 and F-16, you need to be able to contest some of the Russian Air Force in the air that they won't attack you freely all over Poland.
Yeah, and how to do this, for example? Should we have the air superiority fighter or just air defense systems that are good enough?
I'm sure that you have to to combine some and some, because if you won't have if you only be able to, if you only will buy air defense systems, and the very expensive ones, because Patriots and air defense system like this are very expensive, you have a small amount of them, and then the enemy will be able to concentrate his efforts and kill them, and you will stay naked. So it's always a combine, but most of the Israeli Air Force is prepared to strike offensive missions, and the defensive missions are with much more smaller fleet of airplanes.
I understand.
I think that just asked what we think should be done in Poland. If we are Polish, I must add that all my grandfathers and grandmothers came from Poland during the 30s in the last century.
Also my
of course, a lot of us.
Yes.
I think that there are two questions that I would consider. First is, what is the way I think is the best to overcome a Russian threat? Whether the CONOPS is by interdiction, by destroying their bases in the depth, or to what I almost suggested, to destroy a lot of vehicles when they invade into Poland, or whether I need to destroy striking Russian aircrafts or long-range missile. It's a question how you want to conduct this war. First. The second is, what are the resources? Because in the price of 50 high-end aircrafts, you can buy a lot of long-range munitions and the UAVs.
Yeah.
The prices are terribly different.
Yeah, so it doesn't seem.
I don't know what is the best way for Poland to overcome the Russian threat. I would add several events. For example, if you think that it's very important to destroy armored personal carriers and tanks, aircrafts are not suitable and UAVs are great for this mission, for example.
Yeah. So for vehicles, it's UAVs are better.
Because they're staying above, they can come close, they can see exactly what kind of vehicle it is, and you need a very small munition to destroy a tank. If you want to destroy the bases 50, 100, 200 kilometers away, you need aircrafts for long-range weapons, and you need intelligence, the real-time intelligence that might be achieved by UAVs, for example. If you want to overcome striking missiles, for example, what the Russians did in Ukraine, you need a very effective what we can call a point defense against cruise missiles and maybe from ballistic missiles. If you think that the Russian threat will be striking aircraft, many packs of tracking aircraft, what they didn't do in Ukraine, it's better to have like a legacy air defense, good old weapons like Patriots or the new German or British or French shorter range missile defense capabilities, like for example.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what you want. I think that when you decide what is the best operational solution, it's much easier to recommend the right tools to implement these concepts. Okay, I think that maybe in a future discussion, when you will put down an operational idea, we can discuss what are the best tools to use this concept.
Yeah, I understand. I already know, gentlemen, that I will need to, to persuade you to have another recording meeting with us, because it's been an hour, I think, and we haven't shown the presentation yet. And I'm really maybe off the record. We will talk about recording another session very soon, because I'm sure that our audience will want to hear more from you. But I'll tell you the idea is what we want to achieve is, I think we simply want to defend our territory so that the Russians could not penetrate after the atrocities that they committed. That at least that what our political leaders are saying. And we want to have a reach into Belarus and Kaliningrad Oblast to kill the logistic tail, and I want, for sure they talk about the long range artillery like HIMARS and situation awareness system of our own intelligence, but they haven't said anything yet, our leaders, about what kind of air power they want to field in order to achieve it. This is exactly to the point you made, that if you want to sort of project power a bit further and kill something there, you need to have air power. And then what kind of air power? F-35s or else? So that's another topic which is critically important. And you operate F-35s. So what is your opinion about the 5th generation jets in terms of the, the trend that Asaf mentioned later, that air defense is stronger now than air power? So does it still hold if you talk about the 5th generation jets?
I think that, first of all, 5th generation jets are very important in confronting air defense because they deny its capability to detect, mainly due to low radar cross sections. First. The second is the collection capabilities of the sensors on these aircraft. And third, the communication between the aircraft that enables them to work in a much tight cooperation than in the previous generation. By the way, the capabilities of sensors and communications can be added to 4th generation aircraft as well. And what makes the main difference between 5th generation and 4th generation, or upgraded 4th generation, is the low RCS, the low radar cross sections, which means that they can be detected only at close ranges, and that electronic warfare is much more effective.
Yeah,
I think that the other side, the Russians, know that. For example, I remember a photograph of Sukhoi that was shot down in Ukraine, which had a radar, as far as I understand, on its wings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Interesting.
This radar is aimed to detect low RCS aircraft, because it operates not in the 10 gigahertz band, but probably more like in the 1 or 2 gigahertz band. And in this difference is very important because the low RCS aircraft were developed mainly to be unseen in the high bands, such as the X band of radar.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think that on the other, it's only one example. And VHF radars, UHF radars, multi-static radars, electro-optic systems, all of them harm the capability of the new fifth generation aircraft to not be seen.
I understand. Gentlemen, I regret to say that we've talked longer than expected, and I tend to keep our conversations at Strategy and Future, at 1 hour max, so that people really could plan what they are doing daily. Maybe once I stop recording, I'll persuade you, with the support of the audience, to record another one very, very shortly. But thank you very much for this, introductory remarks of the air power. Omer Dank, Asaf Heller from the Air and Space Power Center in Tel Aviv. Thank you, gentlemen. And you stay with us with Strategy and Future for further podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.